And so we're thrilled to have Barbara Kenner with us today. I met Barbara in New York City, so that
Yeah.
would have been five or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So Barbara was instrumental in bringing really the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition to fruition. So we had small meetings, one in Belgium and one in Switzerland, but the next meeting took place in New York. And from that, we've grown from 3 organizations to, I think, Barbara, we're close to 100 organizations from around the world.
Six
Yeah,
continents. Yes.
6 continents.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so Barbara also has the Kenner Research Foundation
Our family research fund.
Family Fund, yeah, and sits on the PanCan board of directors. So I'd like to say welcome, Barbara, and maybe you can
Yep.
tell us a little bit more about yourself before, and then when you tell me, I can open up the presentation.
Sure, sure. So as a bit of a background, my day job is I'm trained as a clinical neuropsychologist. So in this role, I have had really the opportunity and privilege to be with individuals and their families as they share wide-ranging emotions inherent to grief. I'm also keenly familiar with the pain of grief on a personal level, which I'll share with you in a moment.
Okay, the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is, I'd just like to hear from your perspective of how you look at grief. What is grief for you? How do you define it? I'm going to take a few notes here so that we can refer back to it later. Okay, good. Letting go. Mourning. Right.
Loss of the
Feeling
light.
loss. Yes. Okay. Fear of unknown. These are all really good. So grief is actually it's a natural and it's a normal reaction to loss in any form. It's what we think and feel on the inside, and it's often expressed outwardly. So most of us automatically think that grief is a reaction to the death of a loved one, but death does not have to be involved to have grief. It can be the reaction to loss of a job, a child leaving home, expectations not met, maybe changes in a relationship or the balance in a relationship, or a child may grieve a divorce of parents. A teenager might grieve the ending of a relationship. And grief can be strong, obviously, and this is probably more pertinent for today, when a medical diagnosis changes your life. And of course, a spouse may grieve the death of his or her life partner. And much has been written lately about the impact of COVID-19 on our lives, leaving us, in some sense, globally and collectively grieving for normalcy. The lack of regular comfort resources, such as having close physical contact with friends and family, and difficulty accessing religious supports or having a memorial service make it even a heavier lift today to grieve. So the point here is that we've all experienced grief at some point and probably did not feel that good or does not feel that good. But grief is not an illness. You know, in the field of psychology, we like to pathologize. That's a real criticism of what we do. But it's not an illness. It's an experience that's to be tended to. Common expressions of grief. They can, we think and feel on the inside, there are some outward expressions of it as well. And they can all have an impact on decision-making, thought processes, relationships with others, and your quality of your daily functioning. For instance, intense sorrow, sadness and fear, loneliness, isolation, panic, pain, yearning, anxiety, worry, guilt, anger, could have trouble sleeping, could be hard to focus, which if it's hard to focus, then it's hard really to use your reasoning skills. Crying, headaches, questioning spiritual beliefs or your purpose of life, and feelings of isolation and detachment. Some people that I know have described grief in this way. It's love with no place to go. If you know love, you will also know loss and grief. And the last one here came from a dear friend of mine who lost her husband after 60 years. He passed away. And she said to me one day, she goes, you know, I have many people to do something with, but no one to do nothing with. And that, I thought, really summed up how her grief was impacting her. She was just not only grieving for the loss of her husband, but also the normalcy of their life and what she'd enjoyed all those years. I'm sure you've all heard the statement that she lived a good and long life. It can be just as devastating losing an older family member or friend as someone who is younger, since they've had a place in your life for a long time. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, through her work as a psychiatrist with terminally ill patients, introduced a 5-stage model of grief. And this was for both caretakers as well. And she initially proposed that people who are grieving go through the steps in order. However, that was quickly debunked because grieving is not linear. Some people may go through all the emotions, either in order or not, and others may only experience one emotion. But these emotional states are meant to normalize and validate what someone might experience. And I think it's worth just talking about these as emotional states rather than as a particular order. For instance, denial can actually help you survive loss and allows you to pace your feelings. Denial can also, though, work against you in the sense that if you or a loved one are in need of treatment, and it can have some confusion and an avoidance of moving forward. Excuse me. Anger can set in as you try to make sense of what it is or did happen. And some people start to question their belief in God or trust in their doctors or self-blame. For example, I should have taken better care of myself, or I should have not let my husband eat so much meat. I mean, we can all come up with a lot of things that we could blame ourselves for. Bargaining is another emotion. You may be desperate to get your life back to how it was before. You're willing to make a major life change in an attempt at normality. And guilt may also enter in as you go through what-if statements. Depression is commonly experienced in grief. It represents the emptiness we feel when we are living in reality and begin to appreciate the enormity of a situation. The world may be seen too much and too overwhelming to manage. Acceptance is a point that life stabilizes a bit. And again, I need to stress that these don't have to go in any certain order, and a person does not have to experience all of these. But acceptance comes when what happened was not a good thing, but it's something you can possibly live with. There may be good days and bad days, and then some good days again. You can still struggle with sadness, regret, and pain, but you're not struggling to make the reality different. For some who are struggling with an illness, this is a point of accepting of what is happening and an opportunity to do or say things you want, to make amends, or to confirm meaningful relationships. A little about depression and anxiety with cancer and pancreatic cancer in particular. So depression or sadness is known to occur in 15 to 30% of cancer patients. And these are statistics from the United States. So I apologize that I don't have global figures on that, but I have to think it'd probably be quite similar. And that rate is 3 to 5 times that of the general population. But it's long been noted in the literature that depression and anxiety affect as many as 50 to 78% of pancreatic cancer patients. I'd like to hear from some of you of why you think that there is this big discrepancy. There's the typical about reaction to the disease, worry about the effectiveness of treatment, insurance concerns, financial concerns, all of those. And we know that other cancers also have a higher rate of this 15 to 30%, including breast, prostate, lung, and colorectal, but they don't have the same as pancreatic cancer. And yes, the speculation is its changes in mood and anxiety levels could be related to the functions of the pancreas. the pancreas secreting hormones, neurotransmitters, digestive enzymes, and bicarbonate. So there's possible symptoms that these are coming from the pancreas tumor itself. Um, there's no real agreement on this yet. It's still, even though it's been out in the literature, the other part of this is that approximately 20 to 70% of patients with pancreatic cancer experience symptoms of depression and anxiety prior to diagnosis. And these symptoms are often new onset. They precede diagnosis of pancreatic cancer for within 3 months to 1.5 years. So Stephanie, you bringing up about the gut and the relationship to the brain is absolutely correct. Going back to the neurotransmitters and the hormones. The symptoms that this has been in the literature since the 1930s, and research is still going on with this as well. Some of these are a little bit different though than a typical depression, because we see guilt here, we see loss of ambition, we see premonition of serious illness, which sort of sets this type of depression aside from other types of depression. So hopefully we will see more in the future in this area, and my hope is that someday that this will be part of an early detection protocol, is that this will be something that will be asked in the doctor's office of how someone is feeling about themselves. So I think the one thing I want everyone to remember today is that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Some people may have lots of the common symptoms that we talked about of grief. Others may not have those. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. You struggle with loss is unique to you, and I believe that nobody is really prepared for the feelings that come with grieving, and they can be different at different times in your life as well. So I'm going to share what I've learned through my journey with grief. This is a picture of my parents, Lucille and Richard Field. My mom was actually a few years younger than I am when she passed away from breast cancer. And several years after that, my dad died from advanced bladder cancer. So this is a picture of my husband, Peter, and our dog, Chandler. And Peter and I had been together for 36 years when he was diagnosed with neuroendocrine pancreatic cancer. And like Steffi's dad, he passed away 8 weeks following his diagnosis. And Chandler died 2 months later, basically of a broken heart. So I learned, I think, more about grief from my parents and Peter than I did from my doctoral program or my professional work. So I just want to share some of this briefly with you, what my grief was like for each of these losses, because they were different. So nobody's really prepared to manage grief. It was really hard to be with my mom during her illness, watching her deteriorate both physically and emotionally as the cancer and the treatment took its toll. So I would arrange the doctor appointments, make sure everything was tidy. I was really good at intellectualizing what was happening. And then after 3 or 4 days, I felt compelled to escape the intensity of my feelings and return to my husband and 2 young children. But at the very end of my mother's life, I understood that all she wanted was for me to listen so she could share her grief, not me spending so much time doing. She wanted me to know that she was sorry she would not be able to watch my children grow into adulthood, and she wanted to make sure I would take good care of my dad. She had accepted what was happening, but I had not, which makes grief complex and more than sadness. Also, resist comparing grief to others. Several years after my mom died, when my dad was diagnosed with the bladder cancer, and at one point he did not want to go on with a harsh treatment. He was grieving the loss of bodily function and dignity and his inability to do the things he loved, including dancing with his lovely girlfriend. He accepted that his time was short, but my brothers and I were not ready to let him go. And it was during this period that I came to a fuller realization about myself. My way of handling grief was to manage tasks, set the doctor appointments, make sure the freezer was filled, monitor the nursing care he was receiving. This was the role I could handle, and this was how I was handling my grief. In contrast, one of my brothers moved in with our dad, not wanting him to have any time alone, which I think in retrospect, my dad was not so keen on that because he still had his lovely girlfriend. And another decided to basically sit this one out. And we all loved our dad dearly, but we all grieved very differently. Several years later, Peter was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He was overall a healthy guy, exercised, ate well, did not drink more than a glass of wine or beer once in a while, never smoked, and had no history of diabetes or family history of cancer. He was very involved in his business and family life. He experienced a stomachache one night and went to the doctor the next day because the feeling, which was not quite pain, not quite cramps, had not receded. And with his diagnosis later that day, we did not initially appreciate that our life of 36 years together had just fallen apart. During those remaining 8 weeks, this bright man went into full denial mode. He pushed me to be his advocate, and in many ways, he was preparing me for my future without him. He asked no questions of the doctors. That was my job. He just wanted to go to work each day and do what he loved. He wanted normalcy. He wanted to laugh, have dinners with friends, take walks in Central Park, and spend time with our children. As he started to experience pain, fear, panic, and anxiety came along. And I also found myself feeling anxious, sad, guilty that I was not doing enough, and very lonely. And there was also anger and disappointment, which are quite common with this, I felt. We were not afraid to show our emotions. We had planned this next stage of our lives carefully, but we had not planned for cancer. After Peter died, the loss was profound. I quickly went back to work. I found that I needed to maintain some normalcy in order to get through the day. My patients had no idea that my husband had died, and I could keep it together until I got home and then fell apart. And slowly, with the support of family, friends, and time for introspection, I crawled out of a very dark hole. My children had their own grief and needed me, and I just needed to feel it was okay to live my life again. Yet for a long time, I found the pain of grief comforting. Almost if I did not feel it, I would lose Peter again. So there were some things that were helpful to me during this time. And again, you have to think that I didn't really want that pain to go away so quickly. So one I found that was helpful is really facing my feelings. And this I had sort of avoided about my reactions during my parents. But with Peter, I really understood that I had to have time to do that, and I had to make that time. It was also really important to stay connected, to seek out the social support, and to take self-care seriously, keeping up with exercise, nutrition, sleep, and identifying and rating my moods. I identified grief triggers that I knew were coming. And so then I could think through how I might want to react in those situations. I also did recording of thoughts, journaling, making a scrapbook, writing a letter. I think one of the things that I did probably that was most helpful for my children was to make scrapbooks for them of their dad, of growing up from the time they were born to when he died. Those scrapbooks have become something they share with their children today. Also, spending time on hobbies you enjoy. I love to cook, and so I tended to cook big meals for lots of people. It was a way, again, that I had some gratification. And then I found as I went on that I need to reach out to others to see how they are doing, because it's hard for friends to always be listening of where I was in my grief. And I soon realized that I don't know how they're doing in their lives. What is happening with them? So reaching out to them was helpful. And allowing yourself memories, both good memories, positive memories, and also memories that may not have been quite so positive. It was okay to do. I also had to learn to accept that many people feel awkward when they're trying to comfort someone who's grieving. I'm sure that you all have. There was just certain statements that made it really difficult to accept the statements of, like, the one in particular I remember that came up time and time again is, well, so wonderful he didn't suffer. And I was, well, he did suffer. He suffered a lot. That was to me like, and we're suffering, you know, it was, so people were really, really trying to be wonderful, but in some ways people are just having a hard time knowing what to say. The other thing that can be helpful is medication. For short-term medication if the grief becomes too overwhelming, and also engaging in counseling. And that can be individual counseling with a bereavement counselor, which I myself did and found it incredibly helpful. She happened to be a widow as well, and so we had a lot of space that we could connect on. And then, but there's group counseling as well. I know there's group counseling, and depending on medical centers, for patients, but there's also groups for caregivers too that can also be really a wonderful opportunity to share your feelings. So this is how I say how to help others when they're grieving, but it's also how to help ourselves in some way too, because it can be so difficult to know what to say. And sometimes our best efforts can feel really inadequate or unhelpful. So a few ideas here. The first is avoid the urge to rescue or fix. So remember that the person who's grieving does not need to be fixed. I think this is critical. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be carried. In an attempt to help, we may offer uplifting and hopeful comments or even humor to try to ease their pain. And these are all really great intentions, but it could leave people also feeling as if their pain is not seen, heard, or valid. And I have a perfect example of this with my daughter. She came home from work one day, about several months after Peter died, and said to me, it was time to move on. And I looked at her and, you know, I knew that she couldn't stand seeing me so sad, but totally out of character, I started screaming at her. I don't think I've ever done that in her entire life, or before or after. But all of a sudden, out of my mouth came, "You are not responsible for my happiness." And I kept repeating it and repeating it. And it was sort of a cathartic moment for both of us, because we both felt heard. And she no longer felt like she needed to fix me. Like she could go with her life, and I was going to go at my pace for mine. And we'd still have the love for each other, but that fixing me wasn't necessary. The other is that don't force it. We may want so badly to help and for the person to feel better. So we believe that nudging them to talk and process their emotions before they're truly ready will help them get on with it. And this is true for somebody who has been diagnosed with a disease as well as for a caregiver. This is not necessarily true, and it can actually be an obstacle to their healing in some ways. So you don't force somebody to talk. My husband was not one to talk about it, as I said before, because he was in denial and of what was going on and the seriousness of his illness at that point in time, which put a lot of the decision-making on my shoulders that I didn't actually feel capable of handling at that point in time. So I think, but I tried to have him talk about it. And it only came with time and acceptance of what was going on, that he was able then to sort of sit down with me and talk about our life and our future. And then making yourself available is just wonderful, offering space for people to grieve. And let's let the person know you're available when they're ready. Invite them to talk with you, but remember to provide understanding and validation if they're not ready to do that. Doing something thoughtful, like I think some of the most thoughtful things, and I don't know, Steffi, if you found this too, was like friends delivered a dinner one night. Someone took the dog for a walk. Someone else came in and without asking, cleaned my living room. These were things that were truly touching and truly helpful, because they respected that I needed the time, but at the same time, they gave me compassion and understanding and validation that the grief process is pretty painful.
Quite often people are saying, during the diagnosis, what can we do? Or even after. And as humans, it seems like our first response is to say, oh, I'm good, or nothing. And
Yeah.
I've always said that, when people are asking, what can they do, even though it's hard for us to accept help, that quite often I always say to our patients and caregivers, you're helping them too. So, if you said, well, if you're out at the grocery store, I do need milk, or, come out for a walk with me, or have an idea of what could someone do to help. So when that offer is made, know that they genuinely want to help, and it's okay to accept that help. And, I said it's a win-win.
Yeah.
You're helping them feel like they're doing something for you, and you're also, getting that support as well. And, I feel during the process when my dad was sick, some of the people that helped me the most was people that just came in and did exactly what you did. They didn't say, well, what can I do? They came in with a plan and said, I'm taking the kids for the night, or I'm taking the dog, or, here's your meal, it's taken care of. So sometimes, if you're trying to help, whether it's your spouse or your, loved one, sometimes going in with a plan as opposed to just asking them, what can I do, might be helpful. And also, as a patient or caregiver requiring that support, accepting it, even though it's really hard for us to do, to know that you're helping them feel good, that they can help you, and then you're getting the support you need.
So this was given to me by a friend after Peter passed away, and I have had it all these years on my bulletin board where I see it every day. And I have given it to friends who have also gone through grief and the loss of a partner. And I just think it's a very positive outlook, in a way, of finding a place for where you are and where your partner is at this point in time. That there's, it's not to forget, it's to remember is what's important. And also to know that grief has different time frames and has different faces for different people, and that it's all quite normal. And so not to feel that it has to be done in a particular way. There was one more thought here that I thought was really, I'm not sure I can find them in the chat now, had to do, a few people wrote about why me. You're right, why you, right? There was probably, like my husband and like Steffi's dad, there was probably no reason. It was something that happened, and I don't know, Steffi, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I remember we were it's funny, this is like a very vivid memory for me. We were in the elevator of the hospital, and we were getting things sorted out before my dad's surgery. And we were talking in this elevator, but it was a packed elevator, and one of dad's surgeon was in the back, who we didn't see. and he's, you know, he's known, he's an excellent surgeon, and, you know, quite renowned in all his work, but he can be quite abrupt. And you know, Dad had looked at me and he said, I just don't understand what I did. Like, why why is it me that has this? And this doctor, who, you know, is huge, uh, you know, said, why you? There's no reason. You didn't do anything. There's no reason. You'll never find that answer. And you know, it was so, you know, everyone in the elevator was looking behind to see who this big booming voice was, you know, and it took us some time to understand. For Daddy, always, you know, he was an engineer, you know, you always have to find an answer,
Yeah.
you know, to the questions you have. And for him, he was on this search for this answer that he was just never going to find. You know, he could, you know, you often, sometimes people will go back, and it really doesn't even, I've seen women do it, you know, if they, you know, have a baby that maybe has challenges or born with challenges, we always turn to ourselves and think, what did we do? Or why us? Or how did we get this? And even though he was so abrupt in the elevator that was packed, you know, he's right. Like, it's an answer, you know, for us, we knew that we would never get an answer to. And he was basically saying to us, you know, you need to put that behind you and just focus on now, and finding that answer. Once we were able to do that, we were able to move forward and focus on what was ahead. You know, it's a very, you know, individual experience, and everyone else's experiences will be different. But for us, I knew that we, very short into it, we really just had to bury the, you know, why us, or what did we do. I wanted to thank Barbara Kenner, you know, for all the work that you do. Barbara Kenner has the Kenner Family Research Fund. So they are working to advance early detection of pancreatic cancer through collaboration and promoting pioneering research. And she's been a driving force behind the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition, and bringing organizations from around the world together. So the fact that Barbara was able to join us today and share some of her personal experiences, but also, you know, give us a little bit more knowledge about, you know, grief and depression and anxiety, and what we can do to move through those emotions. You know, we really appreciate all the time you've taken, Barbara. So thank you. And
Thank
I'd
you.
like to thank all of you for turning out and sharing your personal experiences.
Thanks for sharing. This is a very powerful experience. Very powerful. Thank you.